Concerning copyright, this policy shouldn't be a vehicle that would allow media companies to promote unfair practices such as market segmentations or allow companies to spy on consumers, basically. For instance, locking down by region, as we see with DVDs, mostly keeps North American residents from seeing European or Asian films. New high-definition Blu-ray devices should be updated and can be put out of service, remotely, if the media company doesn't like the use the consumer is making of it. In terms of immigration, can we accept that media companies forbid people from French origin of looking at French movies, or Chinese people from looking at Chinese films, or British people from seeing British films? It's unthinkable. And yet, the acts that have been suggested up till now have that perverse effect by forbidding getting around locking devices in a given region, a region not decided through a legislative means, but by a private company that doesn't have to be responsible to anybody. And concerning fair dealing, the ability of copying small extracts to use them in different ends, not being able to get around locking devices means that you can cancel. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there is simultaneous interpretation, so please take your time. They're having a hard time because you're reading. I just don't want to take time. Please take your time. The prohibition of getting around locking devices is basically canceling a democratic right, and this is given to a private company. And an act should not allow for the censorship without judicial review of, for instance, the American Act, which can do so by having takedown notices without there being any judicial recourse. And what ends up happening is that a company is criticized, and they use the takedown provision to get rid of criticism, basically. Refer to chillingeffects.org. That will give you some examples. And the copyright infringement is an infraction having to do with civil law. Is it necessary to criminalize this in the context where states have less and less funds to help populations, and the different public security services do not need to have to run after a whole new category of artificial criminals? This is not an issue of national security, but rather of copyright applied to companies that are nothing more than public amusers. Give them a new legal protection would be giving them more importance than they deserve. Thank you very much for your comments. We'll now move on to microphone 1. Mr. Minister, my name is Jean-Pierre Lefebvre. I'm the chairman of the Association des réalisateurs et réalisatrices du Québec, Quebec directors in Quebec. We have more than 600 members working in Quebec and all sorts of languages other than English. We cover films in all sorts of other languages, Chinese, Ukrainian, whatever, other than English. According to you, the people here, is the director an author? Is he the author of the film that he signs? We don't seem to exist, however, under the Act, the current Copyright Act in Canada. For decades, we've been fighting to have the right to be registered as authors under the Canadian Copyright Act. So as you can see, we're starting from the bottom of the ladder, if you will. And this leads to many different problems that I won't go into. But as we don't exist as authors under the Act, legally speaking, this leads to a sort of indirect measures taken or mistaken. I'd just like to say that it'd be difficult to say that politicians shouldn't be paid because they work for the public good. And I think that directors are also working for the public good, an essential issue, the culture, and that they should be compensated. If there is no copyright, there's no money, there's no culture, and if there's no culture, there's no identity, and with no identity, we all know what happens. So this act has to recognize us, first of all, because cinema has become very important in Canada, and in Quebec in particular, that all the measures necessarily be taken so that all creators in Canada and directors be able to benefit from sufficient revenue or to continue to contribute to our culture. Thank you very much. Mr. Lefebvre, Nicole, are there any online comments? Oh, we can wait a bit more. Okay, I'll give you the floor in a second. Microphone number 2.